What's up, everyone? Vinny Musso here from Musso Athletics, here for day 13 of our 30 days of force. Today, talking about oscillations. Okay, so we're still in our second 10-day segment of talking about force redirection. We kind of introduced that concept. We talked about the importance of it, and yesterday we talked about isometrics. And today we're going to move into the next topic of oscillations. So if you remember from yesterday's video, and if you haven't seen it, I suggest watching that and watching the previous videos as well. You remember we talked about pulses. So we talked about pulses to go along with our isometric training, and we talked about how those pulses were kind of like getting isometric work within a certain range of motion. Okay, so in a bicep curl, instead of kind of doing that whole curl, we're kind of shortening our range of motion because that's keeping the muscle on tension the whole time that we're doing that movement. So our oscillations are going to be similar to that, but with a catch to it, which we'll go into detail in a little bit. So the best way to kind of view what oscillations are is think of the term off to on, or to kind of use like a sporting analogy. You see that athlete who can kind of go from a standstill or almost seem like they're no momentum or anything. They just kind of go from relaxed to taking off with an explosive first step. They can cover a lot of distance, a lot of ground without really needing any build up or momentum to propel them forward into that. And I've used this Russell Westbrook as an example in a few videos in the past. But for any of you basketball fans out there, I'm sure you've seen Russell Westbrook play. And one of the things that really separates him from the rest of the pack is his ability to go from almost a standstill or even just kind of like a casual jog up the court to he flips a switch and then just takes off, and you can outrun and get past pretty much anyone. I think I've seen like his top speed dribbling with the ball is insanely high, especially compared to other players in the league. But we're going to be kind of talking about that concept and how to train for that. Kind of that off to on, or going from full speed down to almost zero and then back up to 100. So being able to essentially change pace and change your speeds, like that at the drop of a hat. Obviously it takes a certain level of kind of genetics, something you're born with. Russell Westbrook was born with some kind of muscle fiber makeup that gives him the potential to do that better than almost pretty much anyone. But there's definitely ways that we can train for that same result for someone who's not quite at NBA level athleticism. So again, the easiest way to kind of view our topic today is think of that off to on, or kind of going from 0 to 100, or 100 to 0 then back to 100 very quickly. Okay, and our oscillations, which will show examples at the end, will show us examples of different exercises that we can do to work this concept. So the benefit that we get from oscillations and doing those types of exercises are right here, double starred. We get the full effect of the agonist muscle. So for anyone who's been in the the strength and conditioning world or the physical therapy rehab world for a while, you know the difference between agonist and antagonist muscles. For those of you who haven't heard this, or kind of a little unfamiliar with the terms, the easiest way to describe it is agonist and antagonist muscles are almost kind of opposites of each other. So if we look at our elbow joint as an example, we look at our bicep and tricep. So our bicep and tricep are agonist and antagonist muscles. So when we're doing a bicep curl, my bicep is the agonist muscle because that's the one that's actually bending my elbow, and then the tricep is the antagonist because it's the muscle group that essentially does the opposite of the bicep during that curl. It's the one that does the opposite motion and would extend our elbow. If you think at your knee, your quad and your hamstring are another example. So when you straighten your knee, kind of like when you're kicking a soccer ball, or if you're going up for a jump, when you straighten that knee, that quad is the muscle firing. So that quad is the agonist muscle. It's the one that's actually extending your knee, and your hamstring is the antagonist muscle. because that's the one that kind of fights that movement or that extension of your knee. So when looking at these two types of muscle groups, there's a reason that the body was kind of designed that way. We've talked about how smart the brain and the body are, and your agonist and antagonist muscles work as kind of like an injury prevention type of mechanism in the body. Because if you're performing a movement that is very fast, very explosive, and this kind of also goes into our talk that we did on, I believe it was day 6, where we talked about our muscle spindles and our Golgi tendon organs, or our GTOs. This kind of plays into that, kind of with that same idea that we talked about, whereas our agonist and antagonist muscles work as an injury prevention. What I mean by that is, let's use that jumping example again that I like to use a lot. So let's look at the quad and the hamstring and our knee joint. So when we go up to jump, when our knee is extending, it's extending at a very rapid velocity, very quickly, because we have to extend it quickly to be able to generate enough force to get up off the ground. So our quad is trying to fire and contract as quickly as it possibly can to get ourselves up off the ground. Okay, but what the antagonist muscle group is doing is it's kind of to put it in simple terms, it's kind of telling the quad, slow down, don't go so fast. We don't want that to extend so fast that we hurt the body. So a lot of times what can happen when we do that, when we try to jump explosively, and that quad is firing, contracting, trying to extend that knee rapidly, your hamstring will involuntarily contract a little bit to try to slow down that extension velocity at the knee and the hip, just a little bit, again, because it's kind of like a built-in protective mechanism where it's telling that quad muscle, don't fire, fire fast, but don't fire too fast that we hurt ourselves. Okay, so that hamstring a lot of times will, again, involuntarily contract to prevent that knee and quad from extending too quickly. And again, there's definitely situations where this does prevent injury, but if we are talking about the athletic world, trying to be fast, trying to be explosive, we can definitely see how this would be, this would not be good. Okay, if our quad or whatever muscle that's trying to propel us forward, explosively, or trying to help us do an explosive movement, if the opposite muscle group to that muscle is saying, okay, be fast, but don't be too fast, you can see how that's going to hinder us, and we're not going to be able to fully reach our athletic capabilities. Okay, so that is essentially what our oscillation training is doing. Is it's kind of overriding that injury prevention mechanism, because if we are properly progressively overloading, even if we are increasing the rate at which we fire our muscles and extend our joints, our body's not going to get hurt because we are progressively exposing it to greater and greater stimuli, and it's adapting to those new scenarios, those new situations. So our oscillation training kind of turns off the antagonist muscle so we can get the full effect of our agonist muscle. And most of the time in athletics, extension is the movement that really propels us. Those in the strength and conditioning world have heard of triple extension, which is extension of the ankles, which is also known as plantar flexion, extension of the knee, and extension of the hips. That propels running, that propels jumping, that propels almost all movement. So a lot of times we want our extensors to be fully firing, but if we haven't properly trained, then our flexing muscles, our hamstrings, tib anteriors, those are our iliopsoas, or our hip flexors, are preventing us from fully reaching our extension velocity capacity. So our oscillation training is going to kind of inhibit those antagonist muscles and allow us to get the full bang for our buck of those antagonist muscles that are trying to propel us into whatever movement that we are doing. So the concept of oscillation training, I said we can kind of view it like our pulses, which we talked about yesterday. But if you remember, during the demonstrations of our pulses in yesterday's video, they were very slow and controlled movements. So we were focusing on moving, and in all the exercises that we did yesterday, we could obviously hold weights with any of those movements. So we want to again work on progressive overload. But in those pulses, we're focusing on trying to move the weight up and still being able to control a relatively controlled velocity. So that's how we can do our pulses. Our oscillations are similar in terms of their range of motion, but instead of slow and controlled and trying to bump up the weight, we're thinking about catch and go. Okay, and we're thinking about doing everything fast. So in a lot of the movements that you'll see, the exercises at the end of this video, you'll see that the range of motion is similar to the pulses that we did, but the speed is much different. Okay, and what we're thinking about when we're doing our oscillations is when we're essentially in the first couple, we'll see oscillating squats, oscillating rear foot elevated split squats, oscillating runners squats, I call them, kind of being on one leg and almost acting like we're running without actually moving forward. On the downward part of those movements, you're not actively thinking about really pulling yourself down. You're thinking about turning your muscles off and just dropping into that position. So the first exercise we'll see our oscillating squat. So you'll see the range of motion is very similar to our squat pulses, where after we do an isometric squat, we just kind of go up and down in that shorter range of motion. So the range of motion is similar, but you'll notice now in the oscillating squat, as opposed to controlling down, controlling up, I'm thinking of dropping down, and then the key is after that drop, we want to, as quickly as possible, catch and come back up. Okay, so that's the movement we're thinking about. We're thinking of dropping, catching, and going, and we're seeing how fast we could do this. So this isn't something that you would probably use as much weight for, something like an isometric exercise or one of the pulses. It's definitely something that we can add weight to progressively overload, but we want to really think about moving that weight or whatever movement we're doing. We want to think about doing it fast. Okay, so again, the difference between our oscillations and our pulses, range of motion is similar, but the training goal is different, where the pulses are more for trying to see how much weight we can move and how much we can control it in that range of motion. Our oscillations being how quickly can we turn our muscles off and then catch and then turn the muscles back on to get back to our starting position. Okay, and again, the benefit of this is we get the full effect of our agonist muscle, which allows us to go, basically from 0 to 100. Kind of, basketball players, this is what lets you, kind of be dribbling almost at a standstill at the 3-point line, or kind of, doing like a hesitation where you're going, a slow speed, and then just at the, almost the drop of a hat, snap of a finger, you can be by your defender at the rim, in one dribble before the defender knows what happens, or before the help side defense is able to recover and help. So that is the, really the key for oscillation training, and very, very overlooked part of training. Again, we've talked about how kind of that force redirection is often an overlooked part, and this is even an even further overlooked portion of an already overlooked portion of training. So definitely a beneficial technique that we can use and throw into our training, and whether you're training yourself, training an athlete, or training someone in the rehab and therapy world. Anyone can benefit from this type of training. Okay, so again, just to explain our oscillations one more time before we go into some examples at the end of this video. We're going through a controlled range of motion, so not a full. So for our squat that will show, we're not going all the way down, all the way up. Okay, we're keeping those muscles within a certain range of motion, but we're thinking about turning the muscles off as we drop down, and then as quickly as we can, we're turning the muscles back on, catching and coming back up. Okay, so you can think of it as drop, catch, go, drop, catch, go, drop, catch, go. Okay, again, the key, try to be almost like I've told some people when they're, doing that movement, think almost like for a split second, you're like a rag doll. For anyone who's seen, Toy Story, all the toys, Woody would just fall to the ground whenever Andy was coming to the room, and he would just, plop down to the ground like a rag doll. That's what I want you to think about, first for a split momentary second. Okay, you're thinking You're like a rag doll just dropping to the ground, body completely relaxed, and then how quickly can you catch and get back up? Okay, so that is our day 13, our oscillation training. And again, as we move forward, I'll show you kind of how to incorporate all these methods together. Because we've talked about isometrics, pulses, oscillations today. We'll talk about redirections tomorrow. We'll talk about maximal isometrics or overcoming isometrics on the following day, which we'll go into more detail about. But we'll talk about how to throw all of this together, because it definitely can get kind of confusing, to keep everything sorted out, amongst themselves. Okay, so that'll do it for day 13. Stay tuned. Watch the videos at the end for some examples of oscillation movements. Go ahead, like the video, subscribe to the channel, share the video, and if you haven't yet, go ahead and take a look at Amuso Athletics on Instagram for more training content. See you tomorrow.
Yes, playing.